Hey there, Sam again, making this quick video about how to practice astrology. This is actually a video that comes from some recent conversations I've had with my advanced students, especially those who are starting doing readings themselves, or at least, increasing their reading presence. My level 2 certification after the level 1 is really geared towards getting people doing readings, and I have there's about 10 or more really well-trained astrologers now that went through my level 1 program, and now a lot of the focus in the level 2 first is really getting people up to speed in how to do readings and how to approach certain really sticky concepts. Some of them are about how to talk about astrology to people, and others is have to do with things like how do we tell people that they're maybe making a mistake, or how do we deal with predictions in a way that helps the person. What if you see that they're making mistakes, quote, there's this whole kind of idea. And how do you talk about, how do you, quote, guide them, and just all of these things that are very important in astrological counseling. Now this is, obviously you're going to hear my opinions about it. Other people have other opinions. I did a video not too long ago about remedies and how to approach them from my point of view and what I think is a useful way to do it. But now I want to talk really just about what happens when you're doing when you're reading someone's chart and you see that they're, like I say, making mistakes. Let's use an example that we can all relate to, like they're in a bad relationship or a relationship they shouldn't be in, quote, kind of thing. What do you do? How do you tell them, and how do you approach it? Well, here's the thing. First of all, and this is more like the framework level, like you hear me talk about. This is a concept. Conceptually, from my point of view, and I would say you should really ponder this as well, people are never making a mistake. And again, I don't just mean this as some kind of feel-good, oh, everything is unfolding perfectly. Okay, well then why am I been stuck in this terrible relationship for 15 years, or whatever is going on? Why am I well, truthfully and conceptually, that is what you're supposed to be doing. And you should be able to see that astrologically, that this is the karmas that this being is supposed to be happening, or that this person is supposed to be going through. Now, it doesn't mean you're supposed to say that. I'm talking about this is the knowledge that an astrologer needs to hold, in my opinion, going into any situation. And being able to see the wisdom of what the soul is learning at that time and why. Now, the reason I say this is because too often, astrologers are standing in judgment of what the person is doing. We all know this. We've all had readings like that. And I have to say, there are times when I'm sure I come across that way to people. I try to be very neutral in what I'm saying, in that to not pathologize it, or them, or the person they're involved with, and to keep it out of the realm of you're making a mistake. Because the truth is, they're not making mistakes. You can see, based on the dashas and the sequence and their karmic pattern, that these are the lessons they're supposed to be going through, and those lessons are going to be hard at that time. Because of the dignity of the planet, for instance. Someone running the dasha, I'm just using this as an example, running the dasha of, let's say, a planet that's in great enemy dignity, and it's aspected by a difficult planet, and it rules, an area of life that's trying to give us fulfillment. Like, let's say, the 7th house, which is the relationship house. Let's say they have the 7th house ruler in the 6th house. It's with Rahu, which is going to bring confusion, and they're running the dasha of that planet. It's very likely they're going to have confusing relationships that are painful, that are going to compel them to have to face and be humbled by their mistakes at that time. And they're going to have relationships that look like that. As an astrologer, you can say, well, and what I typically hear is, well, this is your karma to suffer through this because of the mistakes you've made in your past lives, so the only way you can learn this is to suffer and be humiliated and be in the situation where you're not in power. Well, I'm just going to say, that's not exactly wrong. It's not like that's like it's wrong. Okay? This is their karma. I mean, this is what they've meant, this is what they've come here to experience. And when that cycle runs, pretty much this is the way they are patterned to experience it. based on their past, based on their preconceptions that they bring into life. This is going to be what they gravitate toward. This is the kind of relationship they're going to recognize. But to pathologize it and say, well, it's because you're being punished for this and it's a mistake, these are the mistakes that you're making, and to turn it into something that they need to like stop doing or come at it from that angle is very tricky. Because, again, the first thing people want to do, or the first thing the astrologer wants to say is like, well, see, you can tell this is, you know, you're making these mistakes now because of this, and you can explain it, and they feel like they're making a mistake. Instead, there's another way to discuss something like that, for instance. And it can be that if I was talking to a person, I would say, your nature is to expect that relationships are going to take a lot of work. They're going to take a lot of effort, and so you tend to bring that into the relationships. And often, even when there's no work required, like if someone were to come up to you and it would be easy, it would be like an easy connection, you would not believe that it could be that easy, and you wouldn't go there, typically. So this is like if I was talking to you and that was in your chart. And I would say, instead, you have a tendency to gravitate, especially during this time, you're here to work out what it's like to actually serve the partner, what it's like to actually not be the one in charge. And so you're feeling the stress of that right now. But this is the lesson that you're here to learn at this time. You're running the dasha of the 7th Lord, and he goes into the 6th house. And so your relationships are going to feel like sort of servitude at this time. But actually, the 6th house comes before the 7th house, so it can really improve your relationships overall once this cycle is finished. But again, even so, you know, there's incredibly valuable lessons that you're learning right now that have even more to do just with your romantic relationships. It has to do with others in general and service in general, because the 6th house is where we're willing to go through the hardship and the difficulty in order to serve the things that we love. Like, for instance, we have a baby in the 5th house, we're changing diapers in the 6th house because we love the baby. We don't mind doing the work of the 6th house. But because we don't love everything other than the things we love creates a lot of problems in the 6th house. So you're having to deal with 6th house issues as it relates to partners in this lifetime, because the 7th Lord goes to the 6th. So let me just cut. So you see the difference in how that's explained? So there's a way to always honor, always dignify and glorify what the karmas are of the person, because it's always toward a divine purpose. And again, this is a very high level principle that I talk about from the very beginning of anything that I teach. Is astrology is the science of our karma and why things are happening. And one of the basic principles that we need to never, that's a double negative, that we should not ever forget is that every being that is incarnated is on an evolutionary process, and everything that happens in our life is toward that higher process. And if you understand all of those processes, you can always guide the person toward them, and they will recognize what you're talking about. I want you to understand this clearly, because, again, this is foundational to the way I teach, foundational to the way I hope everyone understands astrology, or if they don't yet, I wish they would. All the problems in life are toward a higher evolutionary purpose, a higher evolutionary point. Like, for instance, the 6th house. It's not just about taxes and problems. It's about transforming our mindset from the willingness to serve the things we love, which is very specific and narrow. I love this thing, but I don't love that thing. I'll clean up my baby's crap, change their diaper, but I'm not changing your diaper. So this one thing we will serve, but everything else we struggle and fight against and create enemies with. That's the higher evolutionary principle of the 6th house. So the things we see that come into our life through it, like enemies and problems and whatnot, are just situations to challenge us to evolve. And that's with everything. And again, when you see divine beings, when you see great Mahatmas, they see everyone as their child. So the problems of the 6th house, they serve everyone. They don't have this sense of me and mine, well, I love this, but I don't love that, this duality. So, every astrological principle must be filtered in a very high altitude concept. Very high altitude principle is everything is evolving. And so anything else that we see astrologically should start with that very high altitude, high leverage principle. And if it does, then we automatically are not going to pathologize people. We're automatically not going to say what you're doing is wrong. Now again, you don't have to get into that kind of language. Of course, when you say something like that to a person, like, well, you're in a situation where your relationships right now are going to be difficult. And again, I put it back on them and say, it's not the Lord, it's not the planets lording over you from above, punishing you. These are your choices. Like I said when I explained it, if someone were to show up right now and even give you the relationship that you say you want, that would be easy and that would be full of all this, you wouldn't trust it anyway. You're not in that position. And it happens, right? You've had people that would have maybe tempted you out of this, and what did you do? You didn't believe it. And even if you started with someone like that right now, because of what you're trying to work out, you would make it more difficult than it is. You would bring problems into it, right? And you kind of like go, right? And they would go, yeah, you're totally right. And you could even find times when that happened, because there would be moments where, but so don't make it out like the planets are lording over us from above. Again, this is another very high leverage concept, because people think astrology is something up there doing stuff to us down here. We get into all of this kind of unempowering language. It's not, it's what the person is doing themselves. They are doing it. And again, when you say that, it's empowering, rather than punishing or unempowering, like, what do I do to make Saturn stop? You know, punishing me. That's crazy language. It's not, Saturn is a divine energy, or the 6th Lord, or 7th Lord, or whatever it is. These are energies within us, and we do it. We're the one doing it. And again, there's all this language now about the power of attraction. Why do I keep attracting blah, blah, all this stuff? We attract what we are. What we've attracted in our life is based on who we are and what we're putting out. Nothing else. We attract based on what we are. And so, once you explain this to someone, they can hear it very easily. And they recognize it as truth. And they don't feel judged, they don't feel pathologized, and they also have a clear course of how to work with what they're doing. It gives them a timing of when things might change. But inevitably, people will then say, so what should I do? Should I break up with them? Let's use the relationship example. And they still have, let's say, 2 or 3 years of this karma to play out with someone. And they try to box you into making a prediction. So should I leave them? What should I do? And again, the way I handle this is I handle it very much like I would say, well, or, you know, they'll say, do you think that we'll work this out? Do you think it's going to work out with them? Or do you think we'll break up? And I typically will just say, these kinds of connections, of course, I'll look at the compatibility with the partner, because they might be with a partner that's very good for them and have good compatibility, but they're in a difficult time, depending on what it is. Let's say that it's something that doesn't look like it's going to work out, because typically that's what happens. We'll draw someone whose chart or whose energy mirrors our problem, which generally, if someone's working through 6th house issues during a dasha cycle, they'll be with a partner that really jams that 6th house area, which means they'll fight with them a lot, and after a while that gets hard to maintain. And that's what I'll say. Typically, these kinds of connections, you know, they're hard to maintain. They're useful in what we're doing. You know, we're going through important work with these people. But typically, once cycles shift, then we usually want life to be a little more easy, you know, unfold a little easier. And these relationships tend to, you know, just not sustain. The other thing to do in these situations is to forgive the partner, because people come with all these pathologies. Well, why is he like that? And he's so blah, blah, or she's so da, 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 da. It's like, look, just like for you, there's someone who's absolutely perfect for you. There's someone absolutely perfect for them as well. You two are working on this karma right now. And, you know, this is the way to position it and to frame it. And they'll recognize that. You need to talk up to people. This is what I'm saying too, is talk up to that part of them that's a glorious divine soul. People will recognize it. Again, so often astrology talks down to people. Like, well, you're just a sort of, you know, chew toy in the mouth of the gods, just kind of flipping you all around, and that's what you did, so deal with it. Talk up to them. And they'll recognize it as their life and as their choices. And so, at the end of that, you can say, I'll usually say, well, these transits are about to switch here, and this is about to change. I have a feeling probably around this time, you're going to really face a point of crisis with the person as this dasha shifts, and that's a time when there might be a change. You'll have to see if you can, take this difficult relationship and these issues that you're working on and take them into the next stage of your life. It's often been my experience that these kind of relationships don't sustain into the next part of your life because they're just harder to maintain, and relationships are hard enough without that. So, again, this is a way to empower. This is a way to dignify what's happening, but I'm telling you, the most important part of this equation are those very high leverage concepts at the top, which says everyone is on an evolutionary process. Everyone is evolving. Everything in the chart is toward a higher consciousness. Nothing is wrong. People are never making mistakes. You see exactly what they're supposed to be doing according to their incarnation in the chart at any given time, and you need to align them with the higher quality of that energy. And again, because we don't know what it is, people don't know what the higher quality is of the 6th house, they just say, uh-oh, this is a bad time, this is bad because you've been bad, it's bad, bad, bad. It's not. It has a very high evolutionary purpose. So you need to tell the person what that is. You need to understand it first. Again, these are all the things. I talk about these in great length in my astrology certification program. I talk about the evolutionary process of all the houses, and planets, signs, houses, all of that. So until you know this, you don't even know what to say. People don't even know what the higher quality of these things are. Or it's some kind of service. Well, what does service have to do with like fighting with people all the time? What's the connection? What's the link? So again, understanding all of those things is important. So those very high leverage concepts are what allow us to never get into pathologizing and judgment and turning complex, subtle evolutionary principles into, simplistic, like, well, you deserved it, you're getting it, and da-da-da-da, these kind of things that make a person feel like they're making mistakes and that they're judged and that they're, instead it can be very empowering and very edifying, even the sense that, your soul is meant to happen, this is meant to happen. You're going through exactly what you're supposed to be going through. Just that feels good, even if it's like, because people think, I've been wasting the last 10 years with this terrible relationship. It's like, you haven't been wasting it. It's only wasted if you don't learn anything. And frankly, it's no less glorious than the great things that have happened. It's just, it doesn't feel as good, but that's a different question. And in fact, much of our growth in life is in showing up and dealing with these difficult things. And so, you always want to try also to give the person permission to, expand their perception of the other person as well. I mean, these are big things to try to give the person who is, like, let's say if it's a relationship or some kind of thing. So much of the readings revolve around other people. So whatever the other person is that they're like so hung up on, trying to give the person space to forgive the other person. Because this is all we want. And again, knowing this is the nature of our soul. The reason the person is suffering is because they want to forgive. They want to love that person. They want to find something in their heart that's not just tangled up in some awful mistake they're making and like, why am I doing this? And I don't like this person. No one wants to feel that way. And we shouldn't. And astrology should not make that worse. And I'm sorry, but so often it does. People get astrology readings because they're feeling that way, and afterwards they feel worse. They feel, yeah, he told me everything I knew. I was making all these mistakes, and this person is blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no one wants to feel that way. So try to keep these very high leverage concepts in mind, these very high altitude frameworks, and empower the people that you talk to about astrology. Empower them when you do readings, and try to always bear in mind the higher evolutionary principle of planets, signs, houses, and how we're all here to unfold our karma graciously, and the chart is always a perfect expression of what's happening and why. So I hope this was helpful.